$36 trillion.
Yeah.
Just let that number sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
That's the U.S. national debt right now. It feels, well, almost abstract, doesn't it?
It really does. Almost too big to really, grasp.
Exactly, like a problem you can't even figure out where to start with.
Hmm.
But what if there was this kind of radical idea being floated, something maybe offering it a different path?
And that's where Senator Cynthia Lummis comes in, right, with her Bitcoin Act.
Precisely.
It's definitely a proposal that's, well, gotten people talking. Pushes us to think differently about fiscal challenges, for sure.
Yeah, it does. So our mission today really is to dig into this Bitcoin Act, understand what Senator Lummis is actually proposing.
And look at the potential implications based on this pretty interesting article from Bitcoin Magazine.
Right. The big question being, could Bitcoin, the digital currency, actually help make a dent in this enormous debt? Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with the core of it. The main idea in Senator Lummis's proposal, as the article explains, the Bitcoin Act is built around the U.S. government buying Bitcoin, a lot of it, and consistently.
Right, so the government itself buying Bitcoin regularly for a set amount of time. The article mentioned specific numbers, didn't it?
It did, yeah. The proposal is for the U.S. government to purchase 200,000 Bitcoin every year.
200,000 a year.
For 5 years straight. So that builds up a national reserve of 1 million Bitcoin in total.
Wow. 1 million BTC. That's a serious national reserve of crypto.
It is. And the plan, according to the article, is to hold on to it for quite a while.
Yeah, how long?
At least 2 decades. 20 years minimum.
Okay, and Lummis isn't just saying this is an option.
No, not at all. She's apparently asserting it's the only way, her words, the
Yeah.
only viable path for the U.S. to get out of this debt spiral we seem to be in.
That's quite a statement, the only way.
It's a very firm conviction, yeah.
And it seems she's not alone in thinking this way. The article mentions some pretty high-profile backing.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting, politically speaking. Senator Lummis says, quite explicitly, that President Trump supports her Bitcoin Act.
He supports it.
She claims he recognizes how important it is for tackling the national debt.
There was even a quote in the article, wasn't there? Something like,
Yeah, she said, "I'm grateful for a forward-thinking president who not only recognizes this, but acts on it."
okay, that definitely adds weight to it. Suggests some serious political momentum, potentially.
It does. And, to really drive home the urgency, Senator Lummis apparently lays out 3 possible futures for the U.S.
Ah, right, the 3 paths. The article mentioned those. What are they?
Okay, so path 1, according to her, is basically collapse. Defaulting on the national debt, just can't pay.
Grim. Okay.
Path 2 is hyperinflation, where money rapidly loses its value, prices skyrocketing.
Also grim.
Very. And then the third path, the one she's obviously advocating for, is using Bitcoin and other technologies to sort of navigate out of the mess.
So she's really framing it as a stark choice. And her belief in Bitcoin seems tied to its very nature, right? The fixed supply thing.
Exactly. That's central to her argument. She really emphasizes that Bitcoin has a fixed, predictable supply.
Unlike traditional currencies.
Precisely. Her reasoning is that this scarcity, this inherent limit, can help bring back some long-term discipline to our monetary system, something she clearly feels is, well, missing right now.
And the article goes into what happens if we don't tackle the debt, the consequences. Sounds pretty alarming.
It does paint a worrying picture. She warns that if trust in the U.S. financial system erodes because we can't manage the debt, well, the fallout could be worse than the Great Depression.
Worse than the Depression, wow.
That's the level of concern, a total loss of confidence triggering, devastating economic effects.
And inflation is another huge red flag for her.
Absolutely. She uses some really strong historical comparisons, actually, talking about potential inflation reaching levels like Zimbabwe or the Weimar Republic.
Oh, those are serious warnings.
Yeah, the basic fear is if money printing just continues unchecked, everyday things, food, gas, housing, could become just completely unaffordable for regular people.
But she does offer an alternative vision, doesn't she? Beyond just Bitcoin. It involves technology more broadly.
Yes, that's a really important part of her case. She sees technology, things like AI, robotics, and crypto as a potential engine for growth.
How so?
By boosting productivity, cutting costs, essentially allowing the economy to grow faster than the debt is piling up, a kind of deflationary force almost.
And she called these technologies, what was it, the only real weapons we've got.
That's the quote, yeah. Really highlights how much faith she puts in technological innovation as a solution here.
And this isn't just her solo mission, right?
Yeah.
The article suggests the Bitcoin Act is getting some broader interest.
That's right. It mentions growing bipartisan support, which is, pretty notable these days.
Bipartisan, in both the House and Senate.
Apparently so. It says the bill, first introduced last summer and then reintroduced, has been picking up steam. And it specifically names Congressman Nick Begich.
What's his role?
He's apparently leading a similar charge over in the House with a mirroring proposal.
Okay, so coordinated effort.
Seems like it. And he's quoted, too, saying Bitcoin could provide a fiscal and monetary foundation built on assets that represent discipline, structure, and confidence.
That really echoes Lummis's points about its core characteristics, doesn't it?
It does. Suggests there's a group of policymakers starting to see Bitcoin's potential in stabilizing the nation's finances.
And the article also mentions something already in place, related to Bitcoin reserves.
Ah, yes. President Trump's earlier executive order, you remember that.
Vaguely. It set up a federal Bitcoin reserve.
Exactly. The article explains that order led to the government holding an estimated 200,000 Bitcoin.
Where did they get it from?
From seized assets, forfeitures. So importantly, it didn't cost taxpayers anything directly.
That's a key point. Building a reserve without spending public money. And is that reserve growing?
Apparently, yes. The article quotes Executive Director Bo Hines confirming they plan to add to it through budget-neutral ways.
Yes.
Potentially using revenue from tariffs is one example mentioned, so there seems to be an ongoing strategy there already.
But Lummis argues that's not enough, right? She wants actual legislation.
Yes, that's a critical distinction for her. Executive orders, as she points out, can just be undone by the next administration.
Right. They're not permanent.
Exactly. So the Bitcoin Act, her legislation, is intended to create a solid, long-term, legally binding national Bitcoin strategy, not just something based on an executive order.
Got it. It's about making it official, long-term policy. And the potential payoff, if this all goes ahead. The article mentions some huge numbers.
It did. It cited an estimate from VanEck, the asset management firm.
What did they project?
They suggested that following this kind of roadmap accumulating Bitcoin over time, the U.S. Reserve could potentially offset, get this, up to $21 trillion of the national debt.
21 trillion. That's enormous.
It's a staggering figure. But, and this is a really crucial, but we have to be clear.
Okay.
That VanEck projection depends heavily on Bitcoin's price appreciating significantly, like really significantly and consistently over the next couple of decades. By 2049, I think it was.
So it's based on a very bullish outlook for Bitcoin's future value.
Extremely bullish. It's highly speculative, doesn't account for, potential new regulations, massive market swings, maybe new technologies competing with Bitcoin, lots of unknowns.
Right. So the potential is there in theory, but it's far from guaranteed. Need that disclaimer.
Absolutely. Huge potential, but also huge uncertainty. Still, it gives you a sense of the scale Lummis and others might be envisioning.
It definitely does. And Lummis finishes with a kind of warning, doesn't she? About the dollar itself.
She does. A pretty stark one. She compares the U.S. dollar situation to what happened with the British pound.
Losing its status as the dominant global currency.
Yeah, that historical shift. Her point is that currency dominance isn't permanent. Things can change.
And her advice was?
Basically, buy real assets or get left behind. That really sums up her conviction in things like Bitcoin as a long-term store of value.
Okay, so let's quickly recap. Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act. U.S. government buys 200K Bitcoin a year for 5 years, hold 1 million BTC reserve for 20-plus years.
She argues it's the only way out of the debt spiral, claims Trump supports it.
Rationale relies on Bitcoin's fixed supply, plus technology boosting growth and countering inflation.
Right. And while there's already a reserve from an executive order using seized BTC,
she wants legislation, the Bitcoin Act, for a permanent strategy.
And projections like VanEck's suggest it could offset trillions in debt, but that's highly speculative on future price increases.
Well, she also warns about the dollar potentially losing ground long term.
Exactly. It's definitely a bold, unconventional proposal, challenges a lot of standard economic thinking about national debt.
It absolutely does, which leads to a pretty big question, really. Thinking about the potential upsides she outlines, but also all the risks and the sheer novelty of it. What kind of fundamental shifts in how we think about economics, about money itself, might actually be needed for something like the Bitcoin Act to get widely accepted, let alone implemented?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, quite literally. Definitely something to chew on long after this deep dive.